So let's go ahead and start for today. This is talking about the International Job Search Series with the job interview process itself. So we'll be talking a little bit more about how we go about preparing for a US interview process. Again, for those of you who don't know, my name is Gerald Tang. I'm one of the Associate Director at the STAR Career Development Center. So welcome everybody. Like I said, today we're going to mention about what the overall interview process is like in the US, and we will talk about what employers are looking for, a little bit about what to expect as far as interview question is concerned and how to answer some of these questions. We will mention about how to prepare for the process in the US, and we'll mention a little bit about phone, Skype, or even video interviewing tips. So let's dive right into the process. So what's the purpose of an interview? The purpose of any interview for employers is really to assess whether or not you're a good fit for the organization. I always say to students is that, employers are interested in learning more about you beyond what is listed on your resume and cover letter. If they don't believe you are capable and have the ability to perform the minimum qualification of the job, they typically won't ask you for an interview. So when you get to the interview stage, employers are not really concerned whether or not can you do the job. It's really about, they like what they see on the resume and cover letter and your job application. They want to validate what they read on your paper, on your documents, matches the person sitting in front of them or talking in front of them as well. For you, in your point of view, your job is to sell your strengths and qualifications to the employer so that they can see you are a good fit. At this point, it's really you have on your documents. That might mean your cover letter, resume, or your application material that we mentioned last time. Like I said, the purpose of the interview for an employer is really to assess whether or not you're a good fit for the organization. So oftentimes I always say to students, you shouldn't be concerned whether or not you're qualified for the job and whether or not that's something you can do. Because employer wouldn't waste the time to interview you if they don't believe you can perform the minimum qualifications, what they believe you can do for that particular job they're trying to assess you on. So from an employer perspective, we really want to hear what else that might bring up from the interview process that you can talk about that might be interesting for them to know about you. A way for them to assess whether or not are there any potential risk they may have if they take you on as an employee. For you, it's also a two-way process. It's for you to assess whether or not this is the right place for you. What other potential concern might you have if you are working in this organization? And also a place for you to sell your strengths and qualification to these employers. This is really a good time for you to think about, okay, what are some of the things that you can now talk about that might not be on your application material? Maybe some of your strengths, some of your qualities you can bring to the table, specific skill set that you have talked about in your cover letter or your resume that you can now bring to the employer based on the application and the job. So from an employer perspective, we're really asking you three main questions. Can you do the job? Will you do the job? Will you fit into the organizations and the culture? So can you do the job? Do you have relevant knowledge and skill set? Sometimes employers always expect that you already perfect the documents with so many review and so many added. You might spend a lot of time creating a cover letter, but they want to validate whether or not what they read, what they've seen on your application matches the person. Say to students that you can say you're very good with certain software, you can say you're proficient in certain things on paper. The only way to find out whether or not you're truly proficient is to talk to the person to validate whether or not he or she has the actual qualities that they believe matches what is on paper. So the interview process in most of the time is to reference based on your application material and really to understand, is it what you listed on paper matches the person? And also what else is not listed on your paper that they can find out. An example will be, well, some of the qualities that you can bring to the table. Personality does not necessarily show up on your application material. You might talk about one or two things you can bring to the table on your cover letter, but does it match the persons? Does it match what they believe you can talk about and even elaborate on in persons at the interview stage? What are some of your reasoning why you're applying for the job? What are some of the things that they might be concerned about or potential risk? I call it the weakness question, right? To think about whether or not you can relay some of these issues at the job itself. The second part is, will you do the job? Like, what are the reasoning you're applying for this opportunity? Are you applying just because, or you really want to work in this organization? What are some of the interests that you may have down the road? Do you have an excitement towards the industry? Do you have any profession towards the industry as well? The third thing is, will you fit in, right? Think about the culture and environments. Are you able to blend into the employees who are working in the firms? Things that employers are looking for and thinking about throughout the whole entire interview process. Some of the key characteristics that employers seek, these are the common things I think in all industry, every single employers are looking for, whether or not in the US or internationally, right? Oftentimes employers are looking for people with strong interpersonal skills. Can they write? Can they speak? Can they represent a company in public? Can they be able to, articulate with others, work well with others? Can they talk about the company missions and project? Are they comfortable talking about, the organization and product and services? Do they have a strong analytical and problem-solving skills? Is it something that they can handle on the job when challenges, arise? Do they have a genuine interest in the company and a positive attitude and enthusiasm towards the job? So these are qualities that all employers are looking for. As a job seeker, your job is to think about what example can you demonstrate from your past experiences that you have these qualities that most employers are looking for. So maybe think about for a second in your current experiences, whether or not in your past experience, internship, maybe volunteer job, and any other settings, what are some of the example of ways that you can demonstrate you have some of these qualities? Are there any specific demonstrate how well you do some of these tasks and how well you can bring up these qualities as an evidence for your contribution to your next job? So ask yourself the questions like, where can I show up in these qualities to the employer as a preparation for your interview stage? So speaking of international students, you have really unique qualities that you can bring to the table that might be different than some of the domestic students in the US. Certainly have understanding a global perspective, right? You coming from a potential different culture, different country, different value system that your country might hold that's different than the US. So you are bringing in a different mindset and perspective coming into a workplace that may be a little bit different than what domestic students might be used to. You might have some insight into your field and specialization. Maybe you are more knowledgeable in the market where your home country is from. Maybe you are more knowledgeable in terms of the customs and culture and how you communicate, how business is being conducted in certain parts of the world that is different than what is in the US. You certainly have a variety of language skills, having fluency in multiple languages, having be able to read, sometimes write, or even describe, businesses in a different language is such a valuable skill set and asset to any companies. And certainly being in the US, different culture and be able to adapt and adjust yourself into different to navigate, the simplest thing is subway system, or navigating what is it like to, compose yourself and really living in a metropolitan city that is maybe different than where you're coming from, and be able to adapt very quickly to the US culture and custom is something you can certainly talk about to an employer that all employers are looking for. The last thing, obviously, demonstrating ability to overcome obstacles. You know, is not an easy experience of being international students going to different country, especially for some of us who might be, you know, speaking different languages and English is not the first language. You know, how you can kind of handle any obstacles and challenges as you are transitioning, as you will transition from an international location to be a student in the US or even to be, you know, living and staying in the US, demonstrate a lot of, you know, challenges potentially and how you overcame some of these obstacles. Again, these are examples of skill set that you can bring to the table, and that's something that you can talk about at an interview stage. This can be an example of answering some of your strengths and weaknesses, right? You know, these are example of skill set that you can bring in that makes you stand out as an international student or scholar. With that said, some of the challenges that you also might anticipate that you might experience yourself currently or potentially employer might be wondering, certain language issues, you know, it's not easy to speak a fluent language that especially is not your first language, right? Some of us may be coming from a different language background, totally different language structure. How you can talk about that to an employer and be able to really adjust that in a very short period of time. Some of you guys, some of us might be coming from a different country where complete different language system, and be able to really adjust and communicate effectively in a different languages. It's not an easy process, right? Oftentimes employers are not, as I say, expecting you to completely blend into the US culture and languages, but really understanding that can you be able to communicate effectively, right? That's what employers are looking for. Are you be able to understand others and be able to let other people understand you? Some of the thought process may be different, you know, how you compose a small talk, how you have these, you know, kitchen conversations, the content of your languages may be different, the mechanics, the expression and idioms can be very different, and that can be challenges for some of the international students who may experience that during the job search process. So languages, like, you know, an example will be when people ask you, like, how was the last weekend? How was the weekend? How are you doing? You know, think about the process, you know, in the US culture. Do they really want to know what happened? What did you do, you know, line by line in your last weekend, right? Is it just a casual conversation to start the conversation at any of those workplaces? That may be very different, misinterpreted from some of the international students thinking about like what that might mean. Like their thought process here is maybe just to strike a conversation and have a starters and say, hey, how's it going? What did you do last weekend? That may be very different than what you might expect people to ask you, right? In some culture, maybe they are expecting you to really give me all the logistics of what you have done last weekend. Same thing as how you doing, right? You know, that can, are you feeling good? Are you excited? Or do they really want to know how are you doing, right? Even the way how you ask the question or how you answer the question can be interpreted in very different ways. So I always say, be aware of, you know, what the thought process may be in the US, like understanding the context of why people asking these questions can be a good starting point to help to adjust and accustom to the US languages and culture. Mechanics, right? Grammars, where the prepositions are, where the tense, what some of the articles in the grammar, pronunciations, how you pronounce certain word, what's the consonants, where the vowels, where the accent placement, you know, matters in terms of the language, especially in the US. How you talk, what is the tone, what's the inflections in your speech, you know, how you speak, you know, where you put an emphasis in certain word. How are you doing? That's different than how you doing, right? So thinking about the messages and how people are asking that question can make a big difference in terms of language being interpreted. And I think that sort of goes to a lot of different similar languages, you know, how you speak in Spanish in certain language, in certain phrase can be misinterpreted if you don't understand the context of why they speak that piece. And same goes to any other languages that some of you might be speaking fluently. So the easiest way to think about how to continue practice your language ability is, maybe record and hear your voice and check to see how you're doing with this process. One of the good tips I always say to students is, read some of those books and newspapers and just read out loud and just reading out word by word. It doesn't matter what the content is, but it's really kind of pronouncing some of these wordings on your newsletter, on not the newsletter, the newspapers or magazines or some sort. Maybe pay attention to watch the news and see how the newscasters are pronouncing some of these wording and the sentence structure and languages. Those are a good example of things you can start to get yourself accustomed to and be able to adjust to, the US culture and language and how people present and communicate throughout. Expression and formal, sometimes they may have these formal and informal process. The text and conversational can be very different, and their interpretation can be as well. I always say the example will be when people say, "Hey, how's it going? What's up?" What's up might means in the US just simple as how you doing, right? In the different culture, you may not understand what are they really trying to ask. So these kind of expressions or idioms, it's meant to be understood if you have the same culture and references and context of it. Understanding your the way how you communicate, or whether or not you're memorizing that, you actually respond to it, is something you want to be aware of and thinking about your daily expressions. So just like what I said, what's up can means how you doing in the US culture, but in other languages, they may not know what that might means, right? So those are examples of things that you can start to pick up as you communicate with, people who may be born here, people who might be living growing up from New York, and some of these languages and phrase that might be interpreted in very different meanings when you're comparing that into an international context. So like I said, some of the good tips for you to prepare for is really thinking about, reading up the news. I always love to watch the news because in the newscasts, I tend to have really good grammars and very good languages, and they tend to be able to articulate in a very precise manner that you can kind of learn from and hear from. Reading books and fiction, read out loud, learning different conversational topics and the way how people talk. Maybe pay attention to how people communicate and how people chit chat and have a conversation in places and start to pick up what that language is and means. It's okay to ask, I'm sorry, what do you mean by that, right? It's okay to ask, like, what does that phrase means or what does that refer to? So again, those are example of things you may want to watch out for some of that when you adjust in different places, understand how you're going to speak like a native, right? That's kind of important when you're being in the US, moving from an international location, or being in the US and moving to an international location, understanding how these languages might be interpreted very differently across the world. Is a valuable skill set. With that said, you want to be more culturally aware. Some of the things might be politically correct to say, some of them might not be, right? An example, some American culture is politically correct is to talk about people, food, sports, religions, movies, music, politics, economics, right? Some of the topic might be ultra sensitive. Some of the topic might be appropriate. So an example, it may be appropriate to talk about general policy and overall, changes. It might not be appropriate to talk about, whether or not your affiliation to a parties within the American politics, right? Whether or not you're Democrat, Republicans, whether or not you are very strong view in certain policy or you are opposed or against certain individuals. So you want to be aware of what is appropriate and politically correct to say. That might be, different coming from where you were, right? Even sports, right? I always say sports is an example of the differences in the US and across the world, When in the US, when you talk about football, it means, you know, American football versus, and you talking about football across outside of the US, I guess it's referring to soccer. So when people are talking about sports, you would be aware of like what is the context in relation to the conversations and what maybe even the sports type that they are referring to. So again, these are examples of things that you as internationalists want to be more culturally aware and start to think about how you can pick up some of these conversations and maybe listen in some of these conversations before you jump in so you can understand the context of what are people talking about or referring to before you dive into this conversation. An employer expecting you to have these small talk, right? These are example topics you can talk about. I always say across the kitchen counter when you're, you know, working in a workplace. And having these small talk conversations is important because it's a way to demonstrate you are socially aware, you can be able to communicate with others, but thinking about these wordings and contexts can make a difference, and these topics can really make a difference as well. So let's dive into the actual interview process. Now that we kind of get these down to the awareness of it, let's talk about how you prepare some of these, you know, question and answering at the interview stage. You know, at any of the interview stage, typically employer looking for 4 main types of question types. The first thing is factual and traditional questions. It's a little bit about yourself and your background. The factual question usually start with the what, why, how, when. So the W wordings. So tell me about yourself. What course have you taken in this field? What are your strengths and weaknesses? What do you see yourself in 5 years? These are example questions I call factual questions and traditional questions. These questions get at the general factual insight about your background and your experiences. The way how you answer these questions, it just relay the fact, you know, what are your 5-year plans? Maybe you can simply say, my 5-year plan is continue to pursue this career path and with the hope that you can finish up your licensing process. That's okay to explain already. You don't have to go into detail about why that becomes a 5-year plan and what are you hoping to do. You don't have to elaborate further. Just focus on the factual response of your questions. So one of the tricky questions that a lot of students might be asking me about is the questions of tell me about yourself. You know, think about tell me about yourself is also a factual question. You want to highlight 3 or 4 main points about you. You don't want to go into detail on every single thing you have done, but really focus on things that might be interesting to entice them to ask you more questions on. So an example will be, you know, you can just describe who you are and yourself. Maybe say, my name is Gerald Tang. I'm a junior at Baruch College studying marketing. And you can then talk about 1 or 2 things that you have done. You know, I've conducted internships, or I have done really cool, you know, academic project at Baruch College talking about how to build a marketing plan for this particular company. Then you want to go into detail about skill set. You know, from this experiences, I've learned that I'm very good at, you know, creating graphic and launching a social media campaign. And this is something that I would like to pursue in my careers at the hope that I can start to be more polished about how marketing campaign work and how graphic affect consumer behavior, right? So thinking about a particular task, thinking about a particular skill set you want to highlight, and thinking about what the action plans you're hoping to do with this skill set. Obviously, that can relate to the job you want to apply for. The second part is the behavioral questions. Behavioral question always starting with, tell me about a time, give me an example, provide me a scenario. It's a way to ask for a specific experience that you have had in the past to demonstrate a particular skill set or qualities. These are a way to gauge a past behavior as a predictions what might happen at the future jobs. The way how you can prepare a behavioral question is to go back at your job descriptions and your resume and start to ask yourself, what are some of the things that they're asking you to perform on the job? And what example that you can now use to demonstrate these skill sets to an employer. The third type of question is hypothetical scenario question. They call it the situational questions. The way I describe it is the problem solving questions, right? How do you handle a certain situation approach? So an example here is if you were leading a team, how do you handle strong disagreements about your among your team members? So it might not be a real scenario, but they want to gauge, in a scenario that might have happened in the past or currently, how would you handle that? So the way I describe answering these questions will be breaking down into pieces. If I were leading a team and there was a situation about strong disagreement, my first step is to understand both parties, what their reasonings are. Second step might be to understand the mutual ground on how point of view can come together. The third step would be mediate by really having them to talk about their point of view in a logical process without argument. And the fourth thing is to try to find a common point to bring them together. So again, the way I just give you an example here is to think about step by step how you then approach the problem. The last type of question that typically show up at an interview stage is technical question. These are questions that to gauge your interest or aptitude towards the industry. It's a way to understand, do you have a right reasoning for the job that we're hoping you to apply for? Is there something that they need to know about you, right? How much you know about the industry? How much are you excited about the profession that you are hoping to go into? And the environments will be. So an example will be they want to gauge some of the latest trends. So an example can be what the latest trends in your respective industry. So an example, what the latest trends related to marketing. Give me an example of a really interesting marketing campaign that you came across. So an example of that, right? So your job is to understand what's going on in the industry and keep up with what's happening in the professions so they can start to prepare for some of these answer and reasoning as well. So behavioral question, that's a really good way to frame the behavioral question and answer as well. This will be called the STAR method. The STAR method referring to situations, tasks, action. So the situation is, what's the situation and problem? What were you trying to achieve? The action that you've taken, the result, the outcomes of it. And I will add one thing, the application. What did you learn from that example? What skill did you gain? What qualities did you develop from this experience and help you contribute to the employer's team? So again, like I said earlier, behavioral questions usually start with tell me about a time, give me an example, provide me a scenario. So the keyword is a time, an example, a scenario. So think about one specific example, focus on spending time talking about the actions and result, not so much spending time on talking about the situation and framework. So an example, tell me about a time you had to deal with a challenging client. So instead of going through your background, start to thinking about how you can repeat at this particular job. I was working in this place and I'm dealing with this type of clients. And one time I was going through this particular client itself. So you don't want to spend the first maybe even 5 to 15 seconds trying to give them the reference point. They can just simply say, at this last internship that I've done, I had to deal with this particular challenging client where then you can start to elaborate on the reasoning why the challenging clients will be and how challenging was it. What did you do to achieve that, to handle that situation? What happened to it? And maybe talk about lessons learned. From that experience, I've learned that. From this lesson, I realized that. Or moving forward, I would like to, work on improving this area in this way. So you want to focus on the applications because that's what really the employer is looking for. You can use any real world scenario. It doesn't have to be from your past experiences only to talk about a situations or task, example, and outcome. You can use it to answer any of the behavioral questions. It doesn't have to be coming from your past experience itself. So speaking of that, how do you prepare for any of these interview process? The most important part and most of the complaint coming from some of our employers that we work with about our students is that you need to spend more time doing your research. researching the company, the organization, the industry. Understand more about what is on the website. Understand more about why they do the way they do business. Understand what some of the challenges are impacting the industry. Understand are some of the barriers for you if you are working in this particular job. Read carefully with the job description to understand how you can talk about some of the quality you can bring to the table, and recognizing some of the challenges you experience on the job that might be your weakness or area for you to grow. Reflect on your past experience and think about what example that demonstrate these skill set and qualities that employers are looking for. And prepare to speak about anything on your resume. You don't want to just create a resume and totally forgot about it. And when people asking you any questions about your resume, the last answer to provide them is, oh, that's a good question, I don't remember. Right? Going back to look at all your bullet points and start think about what example can I talk about from here? What are some of the skills that can I mention from here? What challenges might I need to talk about if they do bring up negative things about you? Preparing questions that you want to ask at the end of it. I always encourage students prepare for 5 to 10 questions for you to ask at the end of any interviews that you might have. Make a list of 5 to 10 questions. Answer them from your research. So then come up with a list of 5 or 10 new questions that you can then ask employers to do. So some of the example questions that you always want to ask about is, what is the hiring process? So that might be your first level questions. Maybe the real question that you can ask is, based on my research, by my understanding of that structured interview process, I want to get a sense of where you are regarding the next step. The other question would be, what training and opportunity might you provide on the job? But instead of asking that, you can talk about, based on my research, I've learned that you guys provide comprehensive training. I want to find out a little about how your training being assessed to ensure that the new hires are up to speed with your policy and procedure. So you're really asking the level 2 question based on your research. It demonstrates 2 things. You took the time to thought about the questions. You took the time to actually prepare a list of new questions based on your research to show that you have done some serious thought in this process. And the last thing I want to say is the best way to prepare for any interview is to practice. The practice makes anything perfect. You don't want to prepare your interview the night before your interview actually happening. You want to prepare yourself for things that you can start to feel more comfortable with. Or answer in your question, trying to think about how you can relate your question from you. For interview process and whether or not phone, Skype, or you want to make sure that you are preparing yourself with understanding who is on the call. It's okay to ask the interviewer who's setting up your interview who will be on the call. Maybe learn a little bit about their background online, understanding where what their workplace will be, maybe the title means something regarding their responsibility and the relationship with the call, with your positions. Focus on listening and being present, not to any distraction behind you. Think about how you look at the camera, where the camera angles will be, what the backgrounds that you're presenting, how you dress matters in your experiences, whether or not if it's a virtual interview or a phone interview. Think about the tone of voice that you might have. Think about how you are, whether or not you're distracted or not distracted, hopefully in an environment that is quiet, comfortable, and bright, so that you're not, getting distracted. Even think about your sunlight, right? Are you aiming at a place where the natural sunlight are coming to you, not behind you? So I always say, even though we're completely virtual, great way for you to practice some of these interviewing techniques by really thinking about how you behave in these Zoom calls and thinking about how you prepare yourself in this process. So even here in an example of it, my internet, unfortunately, is flickering in and out, so I apologize in advance. But this is also something you want to watch out for. Are there any backup options that you can have it available for you in this process, right? Is it your phone? Is it other places? What else can you be able to shut it off so that you're not getting distracted in the interview process on your device and so forth? Additional tips, smile. Always think about if you are preparing for a phone interview or even video interview, show your enthusiasm. Smile, highlight things that you want them to know about you. Take that you're being asked, maybe prepare some question. If they're live interview, at the end of it, you finish up, go to the side, write down these questions so you can practice yourself. Keep your answer to be clean and precise. You don't want to go on and on with some of your answering. Keep your answer to be about 15, 30-second long sometimes. You don't want to go on for 2 minute long. You want that to be a dialogue with you through this process. It's okay to pause if they're unclear. If something is hard to hear, ask them to repeat the questions. And prepare a question to ask at the end of it. You don't want to ask no question at all, because it will show that you're not prepared, or it will show that you're not interested in the job. Day of the interview, know where the company is. I mean, obviously, most of the time right now it's virtual, but if you do an in-person interview in the future, knowing where it is, trying to get there around 10 minutes. Don't go there for 50, 45, even an hour beforehand. If you get there early, go somewhere else so that you can prepare yourself first. Arrive at the places that you want to interview 10 minutes before. Be nice to anybody that you interact with. You never know, who might be in the interview process. Dress professionally, whether or not you are on a virtual interview or in-person interview. If you have copy of resume, bring it with you when you go to the interview process, especially any in-person interview, and ask for the next step. It's okay to ask a follow-up during interview process as well. Again, the most important part of any interview is about your verbal communication. That's why I spent a little bit of time talking about that. Think about the tone of voice, the emphasis. Are you highlighting things that are important for them to know? Are you de-emphasizing things that are your weaknesses? Think about your verbal languages, your attire, your appearance, maybe your handshake. At this point, you probably won't be expecting any handshake from anybody. But think about your posture. Are you smiling? Are you sitting up upright? Are you showing confidence? Are you having good eye contact and gesture? Are you having good composure for the interview? Are you showing confidence without showing the nervousness? Are you thinking about fidgeting versus being able to feel comfortable in the interview process? So kind of highlight the three main areas: purpose, thinking about why you want the job and what you're hoping to talk to employers about. If you're not sure, think about why you want to go for this interview. What are you really trying to achieve? Is it the right place for you? If you are not sure about that, it's okay to decline interview coming at you. Prepare. Think about specific area that you want to talk about based on the interview, based on the job description, based on the research and the interview process. And then knowing more about them, the more you know about them, the better you can prepare for your interview itself. Practice. Practice your answer. Try not to memorize line by line, but understand what are you trying to convey when these similar questions arise. We do have mock interview available. We still continue to have mock interview available at our center. Provide students for an opportunity to practice your interview with folks. This is also a good time for you to do a counseling appointments with any counselor to talk about some of this interview prep, and even during a mock interview through virtual to see how you prepare yourself in the virtual interview environment. Follow up always any interview with a thank you message, ideally a thank you email within 24 hours. Keep it short and simple. Try to customize to each employer that you are interviewing with. Send them a unique message based on each interviewer. Try not to do a general email to everybody, but do focus on one or two things that relate to you from the experience. Keep in mind, they want you. They don't want a rehearsed you. They want to have a prepare, the best person that you can present yourself to, but you want to be comfortable about who you are. be genuine in the process and take care of yourself. There can be a stressful process, but take your time to prepare yourself throughout this journey. And I want to highlight a few of the resources available at Baruch. Certainly on StarCert, there's something called Mock Interview. That's under the Resources tab. It's a great practice for you to practice some of the interview process. It can give you a few ways for you to record some of your interview question and answering and repeat them and play them back. Vault has really good career resources. You can also link it through StarSearch. At Baruch, we have the tool for clear speech. It's a good way for you to practice your conversational languages, especially for those of us who may be English as a second language. We do have conversation partners for you to practice with somebody domestic or native born. You can continue to make connections and network and also practice some of the languages that we talked about early on. Other resources, I will always say news is a great thing. I talked about that earlier. Practice that here, pay attention to how people communicate message across. And one of my favorite resources is called The Grammar Girl. It's on YouTube. They have really nice way. It's like a 1 or 2 minute video, talk about different grammar, languages, and also things that you can continue to improve with your English language. I mentioned about these already, Going Global, great resource I mentioned last time about how to search for opportunity internationally, also international firms being in the US. I'm going to open up for any questions you guys will have. Again, thank you for joining in today.